Good afternoon. On behalf of the Synod College and the Department of Arts and Culture, Government of Meghalaya, I warmly welcome you to this webinar on celebrating the Mahatma. And we have here distinguished resource persons and friends and listeners. I warmly welcome all of you to this academic session. This year, 2020, we are celebrating the 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, whose life, contributions, whose thoughts have spawned various works and ideologies. Now, this Gandhian myth has grown with his critics and his admirers, but we have to remember that despite these rival philosophies, we see Gandhi's experiments as he saw it, as steps to a purer, more meaningful life. To expound more on the contributions of Gandhiji, we have the four distinguished panelists here, and they are Professor Chintamani Raut, Professor, Department of Law, Nehru, Shillong, and his paper is Gandhi Changed the World, Article 17 of the Indian Constitution and Abolition of Untouchability. We also have Dr. Charles Ruben Lingdor, Head and Associate Professor, Department of Political Science, PG, Synod College, Shillong. His paper is on Mahatma Gandhi, Message to Students. We also have Ms. Finley Singhai, Assistant Professor, Department of Sociology, St. Edmund's College, Shillong, and her paper is titled Gandhi on Society. And the last but not the least, our presenter is Dr. Persara Lingdor. Her paper is entitled Break the Fetters, a Gandhian Perspective on Individual Freedom. I would remind our panelists that you all have 12 minutes of presentation. Please take your cue one after the other. And if time permits, we will have a round of discussion.
Topic of the talk, which I will be presenting to you in a few minutes, is on the title Women and Tradition, a Gandhian Perspective. I'm honored to be among the faculty of Synod College to commemorate the 150th celebration of Mahatma Gandhi. Women and Tradition attempts to review on the writings of the various scholars and their insights of Gandhi's perception of women in the sphere of family, marriage, and politics. As you all know, women form an important social category, and the basis of this category is not simply the biological entity, but also the socio-cultural construct. Social status and roles of women are defined not only in terms of the gender dimension, but also in terms of the norms, the values, the beliefs, the traditions and customs of the society. These traditions and customs, the process of socialization, govern each member of society, and over generation, they form his or her attitudes and behavioral patterns. Further, these values, institutions and norms, the family ideology, the process of socialization and self-perceptions are important socio-cultural variables affecting the status and role in the social fabric of society. Gandhi, as we all know, was profoundly disturbed by the state of contemporary India, especially Hindu society. His lifelong preoccupation with the Hindu tradition, especially Hindu regeneration, brought him into conflict with the Hindu cultures. And for centuries, as we all know, Hindus had lived with the evil practice of untouchability. Women occupied a very low position in India, and Gandhi, yes, did brought a large number of them into public life. This struggle for justice and equality, Gandhi felt, was the only way to moksha, which he believed will bring change in the modern political-dominated age. Gandhi's early years in South Africa until his death devoted his entire life to leading the Indian from the age of darkness and bondage to truth and freedom. And to lead the country forward, Gandhi reflected on the nature and the cause of the Hindu traditions. He made an effort to acquire a deep understanding of the nature, the mode of its course, and structural constraint of the Hindu society. And in the search for knowledge and understanding of Hindu society, he tapped the resources of Hindu traditions and wielded a unique moral and political authority. The Hindu culture and fundamental values, as we all know, were sound and represented its great contribution to mankind. However, Gandhi felt that there are practices which require reforms. Thus, in the light of this discussion, it is obvious to know that Gandhi, though valued traditions, yet he was not a traditionalist. In the writings of Madhu Keshkar, in her article Gandhi on Women, Indian Women, she represents women's power. Also, Sita was portrayed as a woman who had a voice, and as our earlier speaker had said, she even had said no to Rama, who had approached her, and this depicts the bold, the strong, courageous, and confident woman. She is a symbol of women empowerment. But at the same time, Gandhi wanted the women of India not to imitate the West, but to imply methods suited to the Indian culture and environment. Mahatma Gandhi played the most significant role in involving a large number of women in his nationalist movement. Hence, it is important to understand the impact of Gandhian ideology on women's movement. Gandhi stressed that participation of women in the freedom struggle was an integral part of women's dharma, her duty. He felt that the woman was most suited for satyagraha, protests, as women have qualities appropriate for non-violent struggle and for constructive social uplift programs. He saw that women had great qualities of self-sacrifice and tolerance sufferings which were needed for the non-violent struggle. Gandhi did play a very significant and active role in involving a large number of women in the freedom struggle, and this was his greatest contribution towards raising the woman's status in Indian society. A woman in India was brought to think that she was well with her husband. She was well only with her husband. Gandhi wanted Indian women to be free, to be fearless. He realized the fact that the psychological fear which had been culturally imposed on them, and noted that bravery and courage were the monopoly of men, even admitting the fact that women could not become the Rani of Jhansi. Yet Gandhi was confident that women could emulate still better examples of Sita, who even the mighty Ravana dared not touch her. Also, Gandhi admitted that the real strength of women was her consciousness and her chastity, consciousness of her purity and chastity. This character of a woman is visible in most cultures of societies of the world. Women play an important part in preparing the requirements for rituals in the family and in seeing that the rituals are performed satisfactorily in accordance with the norms prescribed in society. This responsibility was entrusted on men. Oral tradition believed that women were closely associated and connected with aspects of the sacred. She was believed to have the qualities and elements of purity related to sacredness. So Gandhi saw the strength in women, for she can perform dharma, the duty, and the strength, the patience, and the ability to endure sufferings was her uniqueness and extraordinary. Examples of this role of women assuming the status of a priestess is also reflected in the traditional customs of the Caste society in Himakairim. The same assumes the responsibility of a religious office which is occupied only by a female related to this aim through his matrilineage. This religious office is sacred and has religious significance. The same assumes this responsibility of taking care of the Sunan, which is a continuity of this ancient, preservation of the Hima, that is stability of the Hima. And as per the religious tradition, no male was eligible to be selected as its aim if he did not have a female to play the role of his aim son. Hence, tradition depicts an important role that women play in society. A quality of charity and chastity was a strength which Gandhi saw in Indian women. Kasturba, Gandhi's wife, also played an active role with him in all his social and political movement. She stood by him and participated in the national movement, beginning with the voting arrests in South Africa, active participation in all the movements, and also even taking part of his ashram. She also played a very important role, and this public participation of Gandhi's wife sent a very powerful and strong message to the people of Indian women. So it is an obvious fact that Gandhi's success was the role and support of his wife, Kasturba. Gandhi's ideas on women were similar to those voiced by the women's liberation worldwide, and he propagated equality of women in a family, society, dignity. and also the widening opportunities of women for self-development. Gandhi's believed that if rural women, urban women, and tribal women are aware of the strength and rights, society responds to the genuine human needs and perplexities. One minute, ma'am. These perplexities and needs once real, which give meaning to the practice and tradition. But at the same time, Gandhi insists that the new India required to give room to both tradition and modernity, also understanding the needs to elucidate the historical practices and expose to the rationality. To conclude, I will, though there are a lot of writings on women which are experiencing and facing the forces of change, especially the universal concept of human justice which works in her favor. But at the same time, to challenge all these established practices as sanctioned by centuries-old social, religious, and cultural norms are yet to be answered. Revisiting the tradition is therefore necessary in order to make a serious attempt to evaluate and analyze issues solved, especially the changing role and the functioning of the institution that is family, marriage, and polity from a theoretical and conceptual framework. Thank you.
Department of English at Shillong Jail Road Boys High Secondary School. The title of my paper is Woman Seen
Sorry,
Through the
madam.
Lens of Mahatma Gandhi.
Can we start again? Sorry, I didn't.
Mahatma Gandhi.
Can we start again? Sorry, I didn't unmute. So I'm just going to reintroduce you, Dr. Soma Gupta, Shillong Jail Road Boys School. Sorry about that. I didn't mute. Still have to get the hang of this. There you go.
Good morning, everyone. The title of my paper is Woman Seen Through the Lens of Mahatma Gandhi. Due to time constraints, I'll keep my paper very short. I'll highlight only the important points. Women were always looked upon as the second sex in every society. The roots of this treatment towards them can be traced back to property ownership, which assigned specific roles to both men and women. As males became the earning members and were physically stronger than females, they began taking authority over land, labor, and women. This reduced women to a subordinate position, confined them within the four walls of the house, and treated as biological instruments to produce children, failing which resulted in their banishment, exploitation, or elimination. Mahatma Gandhi was aware of Indian women's plight even before his return to India and found that irrespective of class or caste, women were trapped within religious and cultural orthodoxy. While many social reformers raised their voices against this form of exploitation, Gandhi looked upon women from a different perspective altogether. While silent suffering and endurance of pain led to gender exploitation, interestingly, for Gandhi, these traits inherent in women made them mentally stronger in comparison to men. Hence, he felt that women could make a significant contribution in his non-violent movements with their qualities of patience and endurance. Gandhi's outlook towards women and his dream towards their upliftment was largely because of the strong impact of his mother and wife, who were figures of love, compassion, courage, resilience, and also a source of inspiration for him. According to him, motherhood was one of the greatest blessings showered by nature on women. The power of procreation, enduring physical labor, going through mental and emotional changes, automatically elevates women to a higher position in comparison to men. The three basic tenets of Gandhian philosophy, that is truth, ahimsa, and sarvodaya, were traits present in women. Hence, he included them in all his movements for freedom. In order to remove infanticide, early marriage, widowhood, sati system, dowry deaths, and many others, Gandhi felt an intrinsic need for education of women and make them aware of their legal, social, and political rights. Education therefore became a tool to empower females whereby they could take part in constructive activities, be self-sufficient, and have a voice of their own. Gandhi formulated certain rules to protect the dignity of women. Firstly, a girl below 15 years could not be married off by her parents. However, if she became a widow within a year of her marriage, she should be encouraged to remarry and should also be encouraged to receive education from her parents and in-laws and treated with utmost respect. Though Gandhi believed in equality of the sexes, he ascribed different vocations to the two. and believed in division of roles. Men should be the bread earners and caretakers of the family, while women should be responsible towards household management, the two thereby supplementing and complementing each other's labor. This could probably be due to the physiological differences between the two sexes and demarcation of definite roles, and not because women were physically weaker in any way. It is interesting to learn that Gandhi was one of the torchbearers to encourage women's participation in politics, which was indeed a unique initiative taken by limited leaders. He becomes uncompromising when it comes to women's rights because the roots for the success of democracy lie in integrating women into mainstream politics. He takes a firm stand against about the constitutional rights that grants equal opportunity to both sections on universal adult franchise. Gandhi wanted women to look beyond their domestic roles and take active part in the affairs of the nation. He believed that giving favors or opportunity to women by showing sympathy towards them would be unethical. Women should rather seek justice, make a mark for themselves on the basis of merit, and earn a respectable position with actions. In this fight for equality, he wanted women to apply methods suited to the Indian genius and Indian environment instead of imitating the West. Gandhi believed that a positive change, development, and human evolution was possible only when women received education. He says, quote, "Man and woman will attain equality only when the birth of a girl is celebrated with as much joy as in case of boy." Gandhi urged women to shed the wrong notion of being a man's subordinate, get over all challenges, and learn from the abilities of Draupadi, Sita, Arundhati, and Savitri, who are role models for Indian women. It is through Gandhi's initiative that women gave up their secured, sheltered, solitary existence to shoulder responsibilities that involved India's fight for freedom. Sarojini Naidu, Kamala Nehru, and Sushila Nair are among the few women participants associated with the Gandhian movement. This participation made women realize their social and moral responsibilities towards their motherland. Their voluntary involvement in discarding foreign goods, embracing khadi, participation and organization of public meetings, spreading awareness among the masses, willful offering of jewelry and other belongings for the movement, feminized, revolutionized nationalism to break free from the shackles of orthodox customs and stereotypical practices. However, when one looks at the present scenario, upholding of these principles seems to have fallen apart to a large extent due to degradation in moral and humanitarian values. However, when one turns the pages of Indian history, one cannot ignore the fact that the status of women have undergone a massive transformation before and after Gandhi's involvement. The bricks of women's empowerment were laid decades ago by the Mahatma and other social reformers. However, the struggles continues till date. There is still a need to justify, to provide a suitable backdrop and a compulsion for women to be the eternal wife or the mother. When there is any sign of commitment that a non-conformist woman makes, it has to be within the confines of society. Perhaps as our nation embarks on a journey of progression that will translate into modernity, women will stop becoming my themes of formulaic concoctions and gain greater individuality and modernity. Women's freedom is now an accepted fact, at least in theory, and her future seems to be full of hope and promise. Today, as one looks at the positive side of Indian society, there has been a series of dynamic change in every aspect of life. Contemporary women like Kiran Bedi, Mary Kom, Nirmala Sitharaman, and many others have laid the scaffolding for women empowerment in every field. Glass ceilings are being broken every day. The girl child has received renewed focus. education is the flame that has played a major role in changing society at large. But the journey is far from over. It is not a path women can travel alone. Society has to play the role of enabler. We have evolved from what we were a century back. The century ahead can be a watershed of positive change. Thank you.
My presentation is entitled Gandhi, Gender and Caste, but due to shortage of time, I'll just make a few comments on Gandhiji's position on caste and concentrate mainly on Gandhi's views on gender in general and women in particular. Gandhi's position on caste has been widely discussed and debated, particularly in contrast to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's position as reflected in Ambedkar's Annihilation of Caste, in which we clearly see Gandhi's reaction to Ambedkar's views on caste. As emphasized repeatedly by Arundhati Roy in the introduction to one of the latest editions of Annihilation of Caste, entitled The Doctor and the Sage, Ambedkar's point is that to believe in Hindu Shastras and to simultaneously think of oneself as liberal or moderate is a contradiction in terms. In contrast to this, Gandhi's views as reflected in his reply to Ambedkar in Annihilation of Caste was that caste is not a permanent status in Indian society. One could rise in one's caste ladder. For example, a Shudra could transform himself into a Brahmana if he mastered the knowledge of sacred texts, etc. So the central difference between Ambedkar and Gandhi on the issue of caste in India was that Gandhi fought for the untouchables, wanted untouchability abolished, but did not strike at the root of the caste system, which was rooted deeply in a particular practice of the Hindu tradition. On the other hand, Ambedkar viewed Hinduism as one of the major sources of caste system in India. So with these two differences widely debated, and one of the most brilliant accounts given by scholars such as Partha Chatterjee, Ramchandra Gupta, and many others, we find that the debate on between Gandhi and Ambedkar is not something new. Both men were their generation's emissaries of a profound political, social, and philosophical conflict that had begun long ago, and this is still important in contemporary India. Many scholars of contemporary history and culture comment that even with post-colonial India, caste became a subject that was always brushed under the carpet. A secular, liberal Indian, post-colonial Indian always pretended that caste did not exist, and yet caste exists even today in every aspect of our social and political life. So we look at these two great men, Ambedkar and Gandhi. Ambedkar was an heir to the anti-caste intellectual tradition that goes back to 200 and 100 BC. Gandhi was a Vaishya born into a Gujarati Banya family, was in latest a long tradition of privileged caste Hindu reformers and their organizations. Now we have to remember that at the backdrop of this caste and gender debate was the Indian nationalist movement. So, with the nationalism and the 19th century women's question that was there in India, we need to evaluate these two very great thinkers, without which we cannot actually look both on the issue of gender. Ambedkar said women are the gateway to the development of a community, and one needs to evaluate what is the position of women in a particular society, and that reflects where the society is actually headed towards. Now we look at Gandhi's specific emphasis on gender, and we find that improving women's position was one of the earliest tasks taken by the 19th century social reformers. The problems attracting their attention at that time, ban on widow marriage, child marriage, denial of property rights to women, and etc. It may be mentioned that 1916 onwards, Mahatma Gandhi espoused and valorized the feminine within itself. So what is very important in understanding gender in context of the Gandhian thought is that Gandhi wanted to imbibe the feminine within himself. His recuperation of femininity as a moral principle and a signifier of civilizational superiority, these may be read as an index of the inventiveness with which a paradigm shift was conceptualized and undertaken. The shift was located fundamentally in the dual senses in which Gandhi deployed the concept of Swaraj and self rule. And he always thought that it was impossible to have self rule without fulfilling the conditions of the Swaraj. So, in the Gandhian formulation, it meant both control over the self as well as freedom from British rule, Swaraj and self rule. And therefore, Swaraj was always a precondition to attaining self rule. The understanding of Swaraj could and did demand a radical re examination of the gendered self. Now, the question is how did Gandhi imbibe the feminine within himself? Gandhi's own active feminization of himself is epitomized in the image of him at the spinning wheel, where both posture and activity are distinctly feminine. He also actively recreated the image of motherliness through this intense, even obsessive involvement in nursing. On several occasions, he observed and then maintained that only women possessed of the strong, quote unquote, soul force that made them sacrificial and moral beings of a higher order than men. These were exceptionally well suited to such labor intensive, painstaking, and sacrificial tasks. So, sacrifice for the nation was also a sacrificial task, and according to Gandhi, women could be given the agency to actually participate in the nationalist movement. Although there is a big controversy on the question of the icons that he invoked in the nationalist movement. For example, the icon of Savitri, icon of Sita, these were mythological figures which were not familiar to the less mainstream population of Indian women.
And a very good afternoon to fellow paper presenters and the students. The presentation and the theme which I'm going to speak about this afternoon is the Mahatma Gandhi's message to students. I have taken his writings from one particular book that was written by him, Message to Students, that was edited by A.T. Hingorani. This book came out in the 1960s, almost 30 years after my years had penned them in this book. So I have culled from this book some of the key issues and thoughts that the Mahatma had, especially for students. And I hope that the students who are listening in this afternoon will find this message appealing and relevant. Gandhiji his message to students was inspired by his travels, his interaction with them, and also through the numerous letters that he received from young people, and through that lens which he saw issues that affected young people. He was very concerned for young students because he realized that India was at the cusp of independence, and this was the young generation that was to take responsibility for the reins of a new country. So throughout his writings in this book to the students, we find specific instances of messages on different aspects of students' lives in India at that time. One key issue that he was concerned about was that he prescribed truthfulness to students in all circumstances. He saw young people, especially students, as the hope of this new nation. And he said that students themselves hold their destiny in their own hands. He says, students must observe personal purity of mind and body of action, and must be fearlessly truthful. And these words are very appealing to us as we listen to him once again today. He says, keep nothing secret. Take your teachers and elders into confidence and make a clean breast of everything to them. So his ideas are very appealing because they resonate particularly at this time. We also, as people living in this generation, are going through something we have not witnessed. And as two groups of people, teachers and students, this idea of truthfulness, of sharing, especially when circumstances are confusing, is so important. I find Gandhiji's idea of truthfulness very appealing both to me as a teacher as well as to my students. So that was one idea that was very interesting, truthfulness in all circumstances. The next call that Gandhiji had for young students was to become nation builders. Do not be imitators of the Western culture. He was very critical of the Western education at that time because it could fulfill only the aspirations of a few people who could afford that education. It never fulfilled the desire of the masses. So when he was speaking to students, he reminded them to be very particular about the education that they must take and use, particularly in their circumstances. And what kind of education? Through the education that we receive, we must show responsibility tangibly. That means show our responsibility through tangible action-oriented activities. He also was very particular to students. He says that nation building must be inclusive. Include everyone, okay? Every section of society. You cannot leave any part untouched. So that was another very interesting idea that was put forward by Mahatma Gandhi to students. Be nation builders. And this is a message that is very clear even till today. And this is what we aspire, especially being a young country with a large young population. The third, become builders of character. And when he talks of character, he talks of the internal character of a person. Character must be built internally. Character cannot be built with mortar and stone. This is what he says. It cannot be built by other hands than your own. He even goes to say, the principal and the professors cannot give you character from the pages of books. This is interesting, and it has made me think very seriously about this. Character building comes from their very own lives, and really speaking, it must come from within yourselves. We can help to shape young people, but true character must come from within. He urges young boys and girls to be fearlessly truthful against the heaviest of odds that you may face, unimaginable or unimaginable odds that you may face. This is another important message that he has for students. Defend the weak, help the needy, observe personal purity of mind, of body, of action. Never lose faith in God. This message is very interesting, for he is the help of the helpless. I find those words, that God is the help of the helpless, very appealing here. Students must be strong-willed to have positive thoughts and reject negative thoughts. How true this is. At every phase of our life, particularly in the phase of being a young student, you know, there are these intercurrents, okay, that stand before us. And the choice has to be made by each and every one of us. And here he reminds us, be strong-willed to accept positive thoughts and reject negative thoughts. And he closes, you know, this particular idea with this. we can make a choice as to the guests we want to invite. How very true. Make a choice of the type of thoughts that you want to invite. Ma'am, I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, very clear.
Okay. The next point that Gandhi speaks about is social reform of society. He was very particular here with two issues. One was, and the other was the issue of dowry in society. And he asked students to be very clear. Student life is a time for studies, and he urged students as far as possible to keep away, particularly from child marriage. And he asked students to avoid dowry. It is possible that young people coming from rich families can afford heavy expenditures on their marriages, but that should not be a reason that makes other people imitate. The imitation process has a detrimental effect, especially for families who cannot afford, because they come under the debt burden. Just to imitate because someone else arranged a very big wedding, parents, he was very concerned with this, that parents get into a debt burden, especially when they cannot afford. So these were very true messages that ring clear even today. Discourage child marriage, he says. Avoid wasteful expenditure on marriages. Be inspirers through the decisions that you take. Others should emulate the good decisions that you take. As students, focus on your learning and not on other societal practices and pressures. This is very true also. It is not only the education of minds, but importantly, the education of character that will revolutionize the mentality of youth and rid society of its unequal and degrading practices. So this is a very clear message, the education of character. Only then can you seriously think of ridding society of the evils that we have. He does not make out here to speak all, but it is another aspect of Swadeshi that he speaks about. And here it is, I feel, a more matured understanding of Swadeshi. He says, when you think of Swadeshi, please go and please apply it beyond the understanding of garments. Apply it to religion, apply it to politics, apply it to economic life. And what does he mean by this? In religion, be ready to reform those aspects of your religion that are defective. In politics, be ready to reform those indigenous institutions that serve you, cure them of their proven defects. This is the understanding of Swadeshi that he presents before us. Use in economics, he says, use things that are produced by the immediate neighbors. That means look at your immediate environment and see that it should serve you. So this understanding of Swadeshi goes beyond garments. He says to the girls, I'm coming to the end, ma'am, be sisters of mercy. And he says, by sister of mercy, I do not mean a person wearing a particular cloth. But a sister of mercy is one who goes beyond herself to cater or to help, to look into the needs of others. So, coming to the end of the writings of Mahatma Gandhi, his message to students on various aspects of their life and their relation to society was penned and written down with one primary concern. How were students going to engage themselves in a new emerging order? In on country, youngsters into the adult world of practical. That's exactly what is happening to our young students. They're being learners, but they're being pushed because of circumstances, become adults faster than their student life. This message runs through every generation. It has run through the decades post-independence. It has taken the curve when we as a country and the world entered another century, and it is very relevant even today. With these few words, I conclude my presentation, and I thank Madam Chairperson for the time. Thank you and good afternoon.
And here we started the journey, and not only in the form of a civil disobedience, or in the non-cooperation, or in the form of the Gandhi March. So we learned that we were impressed with the personality, with the contribution. We have not expected anything, but finally, whatever it may be, Congress or any other form, so we were able to drive out the mighty Britishers from Indian side. So that's why we have to remember Mahatma Gandhi whenever we live for years together, and not only 100 years of his birth anniversary, and we are concluding by 2 days, by 2nd October 2020. But still then we have to remember and remember. So my subject is here to speak about how he contributed for the removal of these caste disabilities in our country. And really it is not in the form of removing every form of religion, these caste disabilities are there. So in the constitution of others, they seek for framing a constitution, and thereby they thought that first of all we have to give rights to our people. So in the form of a fundamental right, it is very precious and very most important form of, though we have other form of rights in the form of economic, social or political rights, but fundamental right is a fundamental which is different from other rights. So in that fundamental rights, so they have given right to equality. So the right to equality at 14 to 8, they find 17 important because the abolition of accountability is to go. But this declaration, mere declaration, is not sufficient to remove the caste disabilities in our country, which is very deep from the beginning. It may be in the form of that caste for diseases, where sometimes back in any form of the society they discriminated the people because that time diseases were very.
Anyone you want to make big
But
move, you go
some
and
of
click
the
that
times
pin
also boycott,
in
poverty was
the
also
speak.
for the negligence for
The next speaker can just
session,
pin
they
this.
separated from other caste of people. But despite the Gandhi's fight, which continued to Gandhi, not only Gandhi, Ambedkar and Mr. Phule in Maharashtra, they also fought. And the people also spoke about it is not good that we have to discriminate people on the name of the caste because they may be poor. But Constitution wanted to do away with that, but that is not sufficient. The first case in Mysore, it has come in 1958 after the Constitution promulgated and came into force. The Mysore government find, the Mysore High Court find that these are the disabilities out of this form of discrimination. So it is not good, and we should make a law to that. But since that Article 14 and we have Article 35 under Indian Constitution, which enables the central government and state government to make laws with respect to that particular aspect. Suppose that provision of removal of disability is there, but punishment is not prescribed. So thereby, immediately government of India in 1955, they made a Disability Abolition Act. But that could not work up to that 1976. Now their act was renamed, that is the Civil Rights Act 1955, where it has been defined who are the civilians, what are the rights, what are the punishment that has to be prescribed. So that way it has a little work. And surprising to us that in 1993 only the Mysore High Court again, Kerala High Court took a case where the district court find that practicing of this untouchability is a crime and a wrong, and they punished these practitioners or the defendant for a term of that 6 months and also the imposition of fine. But unfortunately, that has been changed in the High Court, and that went to the Supreme Court, where Supreme Court find that this practice is not tolerable. So finally, they were punished. So this is the one case that has come as a student of law to my mind, that where punishments are being imposed. But still then, it is not a law that can remove these disabilities or caste system or caste practice in India. So we as a student of law or a student of the any stream or as a citizen of the country, I appeal to
that this practice is witnessed practice. And another record also, national record says that it is not in Hindu system of life where the caste system is existing, and unfortunately in Muslim also, in Christian also, in Sikh community also, this type of untouchability is there. And most of the, out of 29 states, hardly 5 to 10 states are still in religious practice. So this is the often when we are celebrating this Gandhi say 150th birth anniversary and remembering him, and if you truly a citizen of India, if you truly respect Gandhi as the father of the nation, so we have to do something for remembering the Gandhi not by his words, his deeds. What you are doing towards practicing. So if we are practicing willingness and we have to practice that untouchability is a crime. And Gandhi was also treating them, it is not a social discrimination, it is sin. And that's why we have to treat it as a sin today also. So no discrimination in the name of the caste, color, religion, creed. Because actually Krishna also said that equality in respect of every form, no discrimination in sex or gender or birth or place or region or race. So that's why today it is a time that we have to remember Gandhi and to remember the practices, not the teachers also. So as a good citizen of India, we have to follow that caste is no more there in our society. All are equal, we treat equal to each other, and everybody has to be respected as a civilian and with the dignity, with the respect, and as a human being discipline, and it has the right on the justice. With these words, I thank everybody who are listening. Thank you.
Thank you. Often I would accompany her, exercising the privilege of childhood, and I still remember many lively discussions she had with the widowed mother of the Thakur Sahib, unquote. Goku Krishna Gokhale was a mentor and guide to Gandhi and shaped the focus of his leadership in the freedom struggle. He observed that Gokhale's personal, private relations and friendships were all for the public good, and that all his talks had reference only to the good of the country and were absolutely free from any trace of untruth or insincerity. Gandhiji was in South Africa from 1893 to 1914. Gokhale raised funds for Gandhi's struggle in that country, and in 1912 went to Africa and held meetings with African leaders. Gandhi had stated, if Gokhale had not played the stellar role, the South African problem would never have been resolved, unquote. Apparently, it was Gokhale who pressurized Gandhi to return to India, who would pay for his trips across India, and who advised him not to utter any word on Indian issues till his discovery of India was complete. Gandhi said further that Gokhale prepared him for India. Gandhi had understood the potential of women as satyagrahis when he was in South Africa. The Cape Town Supreme Court had declared that all marriages which had not been performed according to Christian rites and registered by the Registrar of Marriages was illegal. This was opposed by the women in Gandhi's ashram, including his wife Kasturba. They deliberately went from Phoenix settlement in Natal to Transvaal without a permit, which was illegal. Similarly, some women from Tolstoy farm in Transvaal crossed into Natal and were arrested. The coal miners who were inspired by the women joined the movement. Among the 127 women who protested, many were cruelly treated in jail, but they braved it, inspired by Gandhi. One of the most interesting events of contemporary Indian history was the entry of women into politics, especially after 1919. Gandhi drew the women out from the shelter of their homes, out into the streets in the non-cooperation and civil disobedience movements. In a predominantly patriarchal society where women play a subservient, subdued role, it must have been an exhilarating experience for them to venture out of home and hearth, to think and talk of pressing social and political issues other than cooking and caring for their family, and to form organizations deliberating and discussing and taking part in protest activities led by Gandhiji.
It was indeed a fact that prior to Gandhi's emergence in the freedom struggle, there had been women involved in the protest. However, they were there as wives and sisters of the men, and they had not really come into their own. Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay's famous hymn, Bande Mataram, a call to save the motherland, did not entreat women to join the political movement, but rather emphasized, idealized womanhood with nationalism. In fact, as late as 1875, even a new journal for women, the Bangla Mahila, had stated, quote, "We will not discuss political events and controversies because politics would not be interesting or intelligible to women in this country at present," unquote. However, in 1889, 10 women attended the 4th annual meeting of the Indian National Congress. Henceforth, women were there in all the meetings, but more often as observers, decorative and symbolic, as they attended with their fathers and husbands. The partition of Bengal in 1905 saw women protesting in the boycott of foreign goods and buying only Swadeshi goods. However, their role was confined only to hiding weapons, sheltering fugitives, and encouraging the men. They performed constructive roles, but more in the passive mode than active. However, things took a different turn for Indian women with the emergence of Gandhi as a leader in the freedom struggle. Unlike the 19th century leaders of the reform movement, who saw women as passive recipients of more humane treatment through the initiative of enlightened male efforts, Gandhi looked upon women not as objects of reform, but subjects who, if they wanted to be, could be arbiters of their own destiny. Madhu Kishwar had rightly observed that to understand Gandhi vis-a-vis Indian women would be to evaluate Gandhi's general understanding of the nature of women's oppression in India, evaluate Gandhi's role in bringing a large number of women into the mainstream of the national movement, the quality of women's participation under his leadership, the place that women found in his life, and his view of an ideal man-woman relationship as these views went through an arduous process. It is interesting to note only when he faced the problems of mass mobilization that Gandhi came to understand the problems faced by women and the potential force in society that was hitherto overlooked and suppressed. He had observed, "It is good to swim in the waters of tradition, but to sink in them is suicide." Gandhi made it clear that one must know local traditions, but to accept them irrationally would have dangerous consequences. He made use of traditional Indian symbols to give them a contemporary perspective. He made Sita the symbol of Swadeshi by making her wear only cloths made in India or homespun. She was portrayed as being able to say no even to her husband if he approached her carnally against her will. Even the great physical prowess of Ravana weakened when pitched against her superior moral courage. This was the ideal Gandhi wanted Indian women to emulate. Gandhi got women supporters in his first Satyagraha in India, Champra and Bihar. They were Rajbanshi Devi and Bhagwati Devi, the wife and the sister, respectively, of Dr. Rajendra Prasad. In Gujarat, women responded to his appeal in Kheda, Ahmedabad, Anand, Surat, Ras Borsad for money and jewelry and deposited in the Tilak Swaraj Fund. Because of constraints of time, just come to the conclusion. Closer home in northeast India, Kanaklata hoisted the Indian flag, whereas Aruna Asaf Ali had hoisted the flag, the first Indian tricolor, for the first time in the 1942 movement, Quit India movement in 1942. But Kanaklata was shot to death in the police station. Gandhi visited Assam in 1921, 26, 1934, and 1946. The INC session was also held in Pandu. Gandhi admired Assamese women for their weaving, which complemented his clarion call for the use of khadi. It was no wonder, therefore, that out of the establishment of the Kasturba Gandhi National Memorial Trust centers all over the country, Gandhi chose to inaugurate personally the center at Guwahati. 1 minute, please, thank you. The following words by Gandhi clenches the issue that in spite of his certain controversial statements along the way, he was an eagle-eyed, gender-sensitive leader. He had said, seeing, however, that it has been the custom to decry women, the contrary custom should be to prefer women, merit being equal to men, even if the preference should result in men being entirely displaced by women. Respecting the leadership roles of the men, he understood too that given the opportunity, Indian women would rise to the occasion magnificently. As he observed, if the women of India rise, no one could stop India's march to freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, because the time constraint, it will be like 42 minutes. So I shall call up Dr.
I want to present my paper on the life philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi, a spiritual perspective. Mahatma Gandhi, what Gandhi was, Gandhism also the term Gandhism encompasses what Gandhi's ideas, words, and actions mean to people around the world and house them for guidance in building their own future. Gandhism may mean an individual who follows his philosophy or a philosophy which is attributed to Gandhism, but Mahatma Gandhi did not approve of Gandhism, and he said there is no such thing as Gandhism, and I do not want to leave any sect after me. I do not claim to have originated any new principle or doctrine. And he said, I have simply tried in my own way to apply the eternal truths to our daily life. The moment the conclusions arrived are not final, I may change them tomorrow. I have nothing new to teach the world. But I would like to say that if philosophy means a comprehensive study of life, understanding of the deepest problems that govern life and their organization and practical application, then Gandhi was undoubtedly an authentic philosopher in the of Indian tradition. And moreover, on the other hand, Indian philosophy means darshan, which means vision of truth and reality. So a philosopher is one who aspires for truth, and Gandhi starts from the reality as well. So in this sense also, I think he can be called a philosopher. And with his philosophy, truth and violence, he considered Satya or truth as the most important name of God, and he said it is more correct to say that truth is God instead of saying that God is truth. So according to him, truth and God are one and the same. And he said that just as God is truth, God is also love. We love and serve God when we love and serve his creatures. So Gandhi, according to him, Gandhiji said, instead of being in the temple, church and mosque is to be found in the temple of humanity. Next, I would like to say that another principle is that ahimsa, which refers to the absence of overt violence. But according to Gandhiji, this is a negative interpretation. He meant that it means active love, and his interpretation stems from 2 points. First is that if according to the divine reality all life is one, then all violence committed towards another is violence towards oneself. That is towards the collective whole self. Second, had Hinsa been superior to Ahimsa, humankind would long ago have succeeded in destroying itself. So according to Gandhiji, it means complete freedom from ill will, anger, hatred and overflowing love for all. And Gandhiji's aim was not only to have political freedom, but freedom over equality, caste, religion, discontent and fear. According to him, and he believed in the Vedantic concept, and according to Vedanta, Brahma is the only reality. This world is false. The individual self is identical with the supreme self. That is Vedanta philosophy believes in the unity of the Atma and Paramatma, unity of body, mind and soul. So following that line, he believed if one man gains spirituality, the whole world gains with him. And if one man fails, the whole world fails to that extent. So according to him, self-realization is a realization of the self. That is the self stand for the organic whole here. And now the question is, what was his message to the children, to our future generation? To them, he said, stand up to bullying, speak up for yourself, learn by finding out. And he said that forgiveness is the attribute of the strong. The word ecology nowhere appears in Gandhi's philosophy, but the Norwegian philosopher Arne came up with the idea of deep ecology. He said it is from Gandhiji that he came to the realization of the essential oneness of all life. So the environmental problems were envisaged by Mahatma Gandhi a century ago when actually there was no such problem. So he was a real visionary. And I would like to say that the Gandhian approach of protection of environment and reduction of pollution was holistic, socially and economically. And in this context, he made a difference between the need and said we have enough to satisfy all people's need, but not enough to satisfy some people's greed. And this is supported by a well-known Hindu teaching that is Tan Taktena Bhanjita, which means take only what you need for sustenance without any sense of entitlement or ownership because you know to whom it belongs. And so what he learned in the process was to desire the welfare of others, and in this sense his philosophy or religion may be described as and we know that spirituality plays a very important role in Gandhi's life. And Gandhiji believed in the power of prayer, which stands for invoking the inner strength of men for the good of one another. And he said, prayer has saved my life. Without it, I should have been a lunatic long ago. So he humbly claims to be a man of prayer. So Gandhiji was a highly evolved being. To him, spirituality came first. Other things like politics, public life, etc. were byproducts of spirituality. And concept of Sarvodaya, that welfare of all the individuals in the society. Gandhiji attempted to recapture the spiritual heritage of India, and we all know that he is a role model for simple living. He believed in the principle simple living and high thinking. His entire life can be seen as an ecological treatise. This is one life in which every minute act, emotion or thought function much like an ecosystem, and that is why the moralists, non-violent activists, feminists, nature cure lovers all take inspirations from Gandhi's life and writings. So Mahatma Gandhi summed up his philosophy of life with the words, "My life is my message." He was a man of personal integrity. He epitomized a perfect harmony between thought, word and action. Gandhi's life is an example of the Upanishadic saying, to know Brahma is to be Brahma. Gandhi became Mahatma because there was always unity and complete coherence between what he professed and what he practiced. Gandhi was following an ancient tradition of using spirituality as a basis of social change and believed that the reform begins with an individual. Gandhiji's vision was most comprehensive, and this was manifested in all his teachings and action as a man of great principles. So I think Gandhiji is the need of the days, not only for Indians, but for the entire world on the face of overwhelming problems. The Gandhian philosophy is primarily concerned with spiritual development. He believed in the virtues of self-discipline, self-restraint, and self-development. So Gandhian philosophy may appear to be simple, but it is very difficult to practice his philosophy in the practical challenges of life because it requires strength and great degree of commitment. So I would like to say that despite Gandhi's idiosyncrasies and the anachronism of some of his ideas, there is much to his beliefs that is relevant, and for us, his enduring value lies in the power of love, peace, and freedom.
Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear? Now to present, and I call upon Dr. Safi Mosha Blanc, Assistant Professor, Department of Philosophy, St. Mary's College, to present a paper, a glimpse on the Gandhian and Caste perspective of after minutes.
Thank you so much, sir. A very good afternoon to all of you present here. First of all, I take this opportunity to thank Synod College, especially David, for inviting me to this webinar. So my paper is called Glimpse on Gandhian and the Caste Perspective of Truth. So in my paper, basically, I will be concentrating mostly on the Gandhian conception of truth. So degradation of the environment, be it in the political, social, physical front, has assumed a global dimensions in the present scenario. In this late stage of human history, it is possible to see the ill consequences of human conscious and unconscious activity very, very clearly, and it frightens all of us. Since Eventually, modern man went on destroying the planet in the name of progress, success, and economic development. Now, we witness how this process has just not only depleted human inwardly, but also spiritually. The contemporary society is a complex and a broken up society, a society which lacks the sense of basic consensus. In such a society, the tradition, authority, moral precepts which were once held in high esteem were questioned. Principles, objectives, institutions which were generally accepted even a generation ago are now challenged. Social suspicion and tensions fill the atmosphere in place of mutual love, friendship, and sympathy. In such a devastating society, reformation of the mind of the individual is the need of the hour. Gandhi believed that the end life of the individual is called realization, and for him, God is truth, and truth is God. So this has already been mentioned by Dr. Rebecca in the previous paper just now. So Gandhi equates truth with God. He viewed the importance of truth as an ontological category. He said, truth is God, rather than God is truth. Now this formulation speaks of the fundamental change that has occurred in Gandhi's conception of God and his approach to doing religion and metaphysics. Now, in an article in his paper, Young India, dated January 21st, 1926, Gandhi writes the following. He says, I am a humanist, and yet I support Romanticism. The world is changing every moment and is therefore unreal. It has no permanent existence, but though it is constantly changing, it has something about it which persists and is therefore to that extent real. I have therefore no objection to calling it real and unreal, and thus being called an Anukantavadi or a Saivavadi. But my Saivada is not a Saivada of the learned, it is peculiarly my own. So, in the above paragraph, it indicates to a person with some background in Indian philosophy that Gandhi is not using the terms like Advantist, Stoicism, Anikantavadi, Saivada in their technical connotations. So, being aware of this, Gandhi confesses that he is using all these words in his own sense. So, with this as a background in his thought, Gandhi went on to say that God is all pervading reality, immanent in man, and also in the world. But unlike an ordinary pantheist, he believed that God was also transcendental. He is in the world as well as beyond it. Gandhi has thus a comprehensive conception of God. Now, the logic of the manifoldness of truth is stressed on the many and the inexhaustible possible aspects of reality, which is a view which has been endorsed by the Jain school of Indian philosophy in their doctrine of Saivada and Anukantavada. So the key theories of Saivada and Anukantavada, they are like the two sides of the coin. Okay, then coming back to our question on how Gandhi is able to equate God is truth and truth is God. In the metaphysical context, truth and reality, they go together because what is called truth indicates what is real. Truth is the semantic base of reality, while reality is the metaphysical base of truth. However, truth and reality will come together, making it necessary that the search of truth is itself a search of reality. However, for Gandhi, the concept of truth is eternal, and this indicates that there is a higher level where still truth and reality are united and transcendental. Now, here it should be mentioned that this idea is mentioned by Tolstoy in his book called The Kingdom of God is Within You, and this book has great influence on Gandhi. Now, Tolstoy he conceived of God as a reality within us, which directly manifests itself in a knowledge. Now, consciousness and life. So, knowledge is nothing but God itself, and knowledge of God is not different from God in us. So, Gandhi, in his autobiography, he writes, truth is a supreme principle which includes numerous other principles. This truth is not only truthfulness in word, but truthfulness in thought also. And not only the relative truth of our conception, but the absolute truth, the eternal word of God. There are innumerable definitions of God because his manifestations are innumerable. They overwhelm me with wonder and awe and for a moment stun me. But I worship God as truth only. my very life, I hope I may be prepared to give it up. But as long as I have not realized this absolute truth, so long will I hold by the relative truth as I have since declared. That relative truth must meanwhile be my beacon, my shield, and my buckle. Gandhi in his writing, he stressed on the idea of experience, meaning the way in which one lives his life, the truth, the way the truth reflects is reflected in the way a person lives his life. To live in truth means abiding by the principles of truth in thought, action, and speech. Thus, Gandhi in his experiments with truth, he emphasized on the cardinal virtue of the Hindu thought with little modifications here and there. So these cardinal virtues are satya, ahimsa, ahimsa, then brahmacharya, abrigraha, and of course Gandhi added abhasa. Then another important point about Gandhi's conception of truth is that according to Gandhi, truth and ahimsa, which is non-violence, goes together. Truth as the end and non-violence as the means. It is through non-violence that truth can be realized. Now, for Gandhi, non-violence is not a negative virtue, but the positive one of love and compassion. Non-violence, being an eternal principle, is considered by him the foundation of human civilization. It is this principle that prevents the damage of human race along with the rest of creation. Non-violence makes even realize that humans progress life in mutual love and respect for one another's life. Thus, Gandhi regards non-violence as a means to truth because he believes that only a non-violent person can fully realize and experience truth. So, when we come to the Khasi, which is a tribe in the northeastern part of India, we can also see here that the concept of Gaha plays a very important role. So, according to Mr. Stilton Kharkamor, he says Kachinsha is Gaha. Kachinsha is understood as enlightenment and Gaha as truth. The Khasis, they believe that it is from Gaha that all things they coexist uniformly. And according to P.V. Lingford in his book, he states that the Hokkane Kachinsha Bangshula, Gavanatu Bangshula Bangshula, but Vajana Namar Kate attribute on play, he have a gene age of Ubertin Taro. Now, this can be translated as Gahok is an eternal truth which has no beginning and no end. This Gahok is in fact an attribute of play, God, which reflects God's relation with creation. Now, lastly, in his paper called Understanding Khasi Ethics in Palay, an indigenous perspective, he writes that Gahok, being encompassing in nature, includes three other major concepts of Khasi thought, namely Kamayam, which is nature, Vijingim, which is life, and Kapkren, which is world. Kamayam, for the Khasi, includes both the biotic and the abiotic. Now, the Khasis have always had a very close relationship to nature. So it's not surprising to them to see that the Khasis, they document everything, all of the existence in nature. Kajingim is an inseparable part of the hawk because this reflects life. And the concept of non-living is absolute Khasi thought. The concept of Maya is mere physical representation. Thus, Kajingim, as the essence of the hawk, is only subjected to humans or other forms of life, but is extended also to other systems, supposedly living. Kakran, the word, is the metaphysical form of Kahok. Kakran is a vector of communications with Kahok, and it involves two levels of communication: intrapersonal communication and interpersonal communication. Intrapersonal is introspection of oneself, and interpersonal communication is the communication that a person can have with the other coexistence. Now, since Gakren involves communication, it's a spoken word, and it is through Gakren that the individual person relates itself with the surrounding world. So, in this way, the individual will connect or link itself to the world and to the other coexistence. So, it is also through this communication that an individual will establish Tang or the covenant with his play in one hand and also with the other coexistence. Now, remember, the Khasi is sacred because, like Tang, it is founded on the foundation of the hawk, and it is considered as a sanctified conviction or a commitment established between two parties. So a Khasi will never take the Islam for granted. He will always take it very that manifests in the imbalance, which according to the Khasi is the way of life, a life which is led in a harmonious manner, where it is peacefulness everywhere. So eventually for the Khasi, impale is the means for the attaining of Kahok, which is the end. Thus, like Gandhi, who considers the concept of truth and non-violence go together, where truth is the end and non-violence is the means, the Khasi also emphasize on the two concepts of Kahok and impale in their philosophies, where Kahok is the end and impale is the means. Both the philosophies they stress on the end that is the hawk or the truth, and can be fully realized only through non-violence and impale. Of course, there is, the Gandhi conception of truth, it differs from the Khasi conception of Kahok when it comes to the question of evil. Now, so I'll just highlight. Alright, so Gandhi, when he talks about the evil, when he talks about evil, he talks about the conception of God, he considers God to be all inclusive. So evil is also part of God, and says that it is up to human to overcome. But for the Khazis really consider that it is, hope is very much an existential principle where a person is given the choice to live rightly or live wrongly, because according to the Khazis, they also talk about the Judan, where you can establish Islam on Kanyasur, alright, and if it sort of stands in point of even Islam will be considered. So in conclusion, it is observed that the concept of truth, it differs from one culture to the other, as we've seen from the Gandhian conception and the Khasi conception, yet it is held supreme in all the different societies. Now, this makes it a fundamental concept forever. Many instances in the world may come and go, and human may come and go, yet the concept of truth will go on forever. So to end in the words of Gandhi himself in his autobiography, he says, let hundreds like me perish, but let peace prevail. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Safi Mosha. Now I call upon Dr. Sengshi Diamai, Assistant Professor, Department of History, Sangardev College, and she will be presenting a paper on Gandhi's concept on education of women with special reference to the Garo woman. Dr. Sengshi Diamai.
Thank you. Very good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this webinar, especially my friend Sarkir Buam, for inviting me to present a paper on this very auspicious occasion, celebrating the Mahatma. So the title of the paper is Gandhi's Concept on Education of Women with special reference to the Garo woman. In this paper, we will use a historical lens to examine the issue of women's education among the father of the nation. Like many reformers, played an important role in bringing about a revolutionary change in the status of women in the 20th century. He strongly believed that the emancipation of women is necessary for all-round development of the whole humanity. He championed for their upliftment. Therefore, he felt that women must be given education. But his views of women education is based on biological discrimination of men and women and on family ideas. Because of his view, it is necessary to maintain a difference between the education of the two. His view was that, on one hand, man is supreme in the outward activities of a married pair, and therefore it is in the fitness of things that he should have a greater knowledge thereof. On the other hand, home life is entirely the sphere of a woman, and therefore in domestic affairs, in the upbringing and education of children, women ought to have more education. He advocated education for both, but differently. So we will now come to the historical lens of the Garo, of the education of the tribal Garo women. Now, women's education in the modern sense started in the 19th century during the times of the British. Garo Hills came under the British government in 1867, and it was the British government that invited the American Baptist missionaries to educate the Garos. The credit goes to this mission, who, in order to facilitate evangelization, opened up schools which provided both men and women with new outlook and opportunities, and also for introducing the Roman alphabet for the Garo language. Now, the Garos were the first hill tribes to have been converted to Christianity. The Garos are a tribe following a matrilineal system of descent and inheritance. As such, we will see a Garo girl receive due attention, for she is the one who inherits the property. Now, in pre-missionary period, boys aged 10 years and above were given traditional learning in the bachelor's dormitory called the Nopante. But the Garo girl grew up with no education in any special institution like the boys. Now, like all the tribal girls, the Garo girls too, with their heavy responsibilities in the fields and home, they were unable to attend the schools, and most of all, they regarded education which was brought by the missionaries as a no fruitful end. The missionaries, however, lured the girls to school, and their main aim in introducing education was to make good Christian wives for Christian men. Their main aim was to spread Christianity. And the Garo girls too started education or took up education with the same aim, mainly to find an educated husband. But by the beginning of the 20th century, there was a change in the attitude where many girls began to pursue higher studies, and a number of them began to take up teaching and nursing profession. Education then provided the Garo women with new job opportunities. Now, the Garo girls who did not go for higher studies, what they would do is, after they finished their middle school, they would return back home, return back to their villages, and take up the roles of being a Christian wife or Christian mother and help spread Christianity. Now, worth mentioning in the field of education was the formation of the Mothers' Union, which was formed in the year 1941. Now, the formation of this Mothers' Union, its aim was to develop the Garo society, and when we look at these aims, we will see that the aims are very much influenced by the teachings the girls had received in the missionary schools. Now, for example, one of the aims was that mothers must work hard together to bring up their children in the best moral character and conduct, to educate and encourage Garo women from the interior part to dress courteously, to educate and to encourage the women folk to respect their husband and parents in order to set good example to their children to show the same respect to their parents, elders and teachers. Now, this Mothers' Union, I've mentioned it because it is one of the powerful organizations and was instrumental in bringing about a great change in the social life of the Garos. Even today, the 21st century, it has expanded its horizon of activities, having different departments, which included the literature wing, the education wing, agricultural wing, and also the weaving wing. Here is where we see Gandhi seemed to be in tune with the concept of education the missionaries imparted on the Garo women. And the obvious reason was because the church structure of the missionaries was patriarchal in nature, so as Gandhi and his patriarchal ideology regarding the education of the women. Now, even in the post-independence India, since we are doing about the historical lens of the Garo education among the women, even in the post-independence India, the idea of the University Education Commission of Free India did not vary much from the attitudes of the 19th century and the early 20th century ideologies. But gradually by the 1960s, in the educational changes in the educational policy of India improved the educational setup for the women. Now, missionary schools in Garo Hills in the post-independence period had been directed to run according to the rules and regulations as laid down in the Constitution. Girls received education by the time, began to opt for higher studies to obtain bachelor's or master's degree and other postgraduate degrees in various streams, and produce a galaxy of specialists in different fields. That is, we are talking about the 21st century woman. Another achievement of the Garo woman can be seen when the Garo churches are struggling, are fighting for women's ordination. And that was successful. They came out successful in the year 2001, when the first Garo woman was ordained as a pastor. Now, my conclusion here would be that Gandhiji, though progressive for his time, when he developed his conception on education of women, he could have conceived of women's role as that of a mother and homemaker. Why? It is because of his patriarchal ideology. Okay, but he was quite progressive that particular period of time. But because of his patriarchal ideology, there was some lack in the education. And therefore, seen from the position of today's modern woman, Gandhiji's view on women were far more traditional. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Sengshi Diamai, for that paper. Now we call on the last presenter, Mr. Kerli Hok Lingdok Wam, Head and Assistant Professor, Department of History, Synod College, and his paper will be on Gandhi's concept of rural economy. Sir Kerli.
Thank you, Sir David. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Development were rooted to imbalance in the occupational structure due to such deindustrialization. Now, even the large-scale deindustrialization brought far-reaching impacts on the economy, the national economy, which was earlier considered a blend of agriculture and handicraft. Thus, it cannot be denied that India was destroyed by British industrialization and its backwash, disintegration of self-assured villages through progressive encroachment of the peasant and destruction of artisans. Now, a lot of views, a lot of opinion have been put forward by eminent economic historians in India as well as Western writers in discussing the process of economization and the British economic policy itself in India. Now, however, Gandhi reflected a different strategy. Gandhi reflected that the main constituents of his strategy of India's reconstruction in his Hind Swaraj make it clear that the modern civilization nourished by British rule was the real cause of economic distress. That's a little bit about the background when we talk about the position of the rural economy during the colonial rule. Now, after his return from South Africa in 1915 onward, Mahatma Gandhi for nearly a year traveled all over India, trying to understand throughout the country about the conditions of the Indians. That Gandhi started the All India Village Industry Association, IVIA, to work towards the development of a model of non-exploitative rural industrialization, reflect his fight against British industry and advocacy of Swadeshi through the promotion of Indian small-scale and cottage industry and the development of free goods, especially khadi, of which we are all aware of, as Gandhiji believed, is not only the tool of self-reliance or symbol of nationalism. Never, it also play a vital role in the economic growth of the nation. Now, when we look at the basic components of Indian rural economy, Gandhian's rural economy was what he sees was a self-sufficient village and decentralization of economic and political powers, which gave a very important place to the development of khadi and village industry. It was emphasis on khadi and villages that brought about a sense among a large group of Indians who began to think in terms of human terms about the village presence. Now, it is Gandhi again who made the Indian urban community realize that behind the glitters of cities there lies miseries and poverty, and that it is important to acknowledge that true progress lies not in the creation of millionaires or big cities, but reducing the poverty and miseries of the poor peasant in villages. Thus, Gandhian economic concept starts from the fundamental proposition that the economic policy of colonial regime must be eliminated, new economic tailor-made order should be erected, which will abolish exploitative effect of factories and manufacturers, and the parasitic effect of the urban and rural relations. Based on this, it is thus important to analyze a little bit on Gandhi's perception of this rural economy. Gandhi was very well aware. That the lives in India that India lives in villages. Hence, if a village economy is improved, then only India will improve. Thus, what he envisaged was the revival of village industry for sustainable economic development, so as to bring in economic efficiency. For this, Gandhi laid emphasis on micro-level regional planning and focus on the overall development of the villages. Now, Gandhi, who traveled throughout villages of rural India, endeared him with a profound love, in a way, of the land, respect for the people who toiled the land, believed that it was impractical for India's cities to accommodate a popular population. Now, in the Indian context, rural development is as maximizing productions in agriculture and allied activities in rural area, which may include development of rural industry, with emphasis on village and cottage industry. Now, Gandhi was firm on encouraging village-level cottage industry, which is based on local raw material to create employment for the local people. Now, the village industries cannot be complete without essential industries such as oil pressing, soap making, paper making, etc. The other village industries cover cattle farming, dairy, compost nature, and most of these industries located in cities require raw material produced in villages. Thus, Gandhi's stress on rural development through small-scale industries and the principles of trusteeship. In the current context, Indian villages require to be revived. Gandhi's aspiration for a sustainable development, which meets the need of the person without compromising the ability of future generations to meet the need, is based on the economic efficiencies, use of local resources, local workforce, conservation of resources, and social equity. Now, Gandhi also is in favor of self-sufficient village economy, where the villages will be independent economic unit. Now, the idea of self-sufficiency of villages means the villages in their capacity should try to meet the basic requirements of the villages. Now, Gandhi, again, whenever things cannot be produced, should be obtained in exchange of surplus products produced in villages, that what can be received. But it does not mean that villages will export or send it to the far-off cities. In a nutshell, villages should be served first in the neighborhood, in the district, in the province, and the cities. Now, Gandhi philosophy was also when he talk about when he tried to bring a concept of rural economy, he also laid emphasis on the elimination of poverty. His philosophy on this is not possible by mere growing per capita income, but through empowering the village economy as India lives in the villages. Hence, for the eradication of poverty efforts are necessary on the grassroots levels. Eradication of poverty are necessary on a grassroots level. This is reflected through his message again by making village economy self-sufficient, retaining village manpower in the villages by revival of cottage industries, and he wished that each common man should also earn a living. Now, for this to achieve, Gandhi stressed on what is called as Naib Talim, or an education that should be imparted to the hands of training and should blend the four things of life together: craft, literary instruction, hygiene, and art. He insisted that craft should be regarded as a medium for industries and emphasized on skill and job-oriented education of masses, which should help them to earn their livelihood. But by minimizing requirement, for he was convinced that if villages perish, India will perish too. Again, when Gandhi talks about the need to revive village industries that could create livelihood for millions of Indians or villages, he does not go again, or he's not against machines, but he wanted to create employment for the millions of hands which otherwise would remain idle. Now, in order to use the local human resources or to control migration from rural to urban, organization of labor-intensive public work schemes are necessary. And that aspiration of Gandhi, that vision that he had, that goal that he had, was reflected in the present government schemes of MGN and Rega. Now, to raise the productivity of agriculture also, there are many schemes that has been done or has been implemented at the village-based level or the village levels using the ideology or the aspiration of Gandhi. Now, Gandhi used to say like this. He used to say that go back to the villages. He never meant that city dwellers should go and live in the villages and reside there. But he wanted the youth from the villages should sustain in the villages. Sustainable economic development is not possible without local and trade resources. Thus, youth should spend their vacation, spend their holiday in the villages surrounding the colleges, and those who have finished their education should think of settling in the villages for reconstruction of them. Another important point aspect of which Gandhi believed through this concept of rural economy was in the developing and fostering was an employment infrastructure for employment generation, so that migration to cities could be controlled and reverse migration started to begin. Now, he did insist on this, that conservation of and management of local resources to meet local needs. And according to him, there is sufficient to satisfy needs. Now, for social equality and to rebuild India from the lowest level to the poorest and weakest, Gandhi was in favor of the highest degree of localization and decentralization of production and distribution, along with ownership of means of production, laborers himself. Now, thus, in Gandhi, economic views were humanitarian in nature, stemming from his concern for the toiling peasants, factories workers, and jobless. To conclude, there are around more than 750 villages scattered all over the area of 1,900 miles long and 1,500 broad. Now, the people are rooted in the soil, and majority of them live from hand to mouth. Now, agriculture does not need revolutionary changes, but the revival of villages is possible only when it is no more exploited. Gandhian ideology, Gandhian conception of rural economy was that to concentrate on village being self-contained, manufacturing on use, provided this character of villages. Again, just before I end, at the turn of the 21st century, in the year 2000, the UN and the world leaders agreed on a number of global goals that should be achieved immediately. Gender equality, universal primary education, a fight for hunger and poverty, to reduce child mortality, improve mental health, combating AIDS, ensuring environmental stabilities, and global partnership. All of these are the real visionary that these goals are the priorities of Gandhi. These are there with him. His philosophy, his thinking can only show to light to achieve these goals. Thus, to conclude in a nutshell, the Gandhi concept of village economy and rural development cannot be overlooked, and they still guide India of the 21st
Now we've come to the end of this very interesting session. I thank all the presenters and I thank all the listeners here, and especially the ones who have organized, who have been responsible for organizing this webinar. We know that Gandhi was interested not just for winning India's freedom struggle, but also for building up a new India. And for that reason, he has even devised the 18-point constructive program, which he visualized Hindu-Muslim unity, the education for women and empowerment of women, the use of Khadi and Swadeshi, and of course the removal of untouchability. So I trust that all of us are more informed on the contributions of Gandhi. On that note, I thank all of you. Have a good day.
Anybody would like to ask any questions to the four invited paper presenters? Okay, I think there is no question. The chair would sum up the four papers and give, the vote of thanks on behalf of the college. Now, before I would do that, I would like just to make some observations and, and summing up of what the four papers they have said. Now, Dr. Lalita Agarwal, she has lamented that Gandhi was not an academic philosopher, but he never claimed himself to be a philosopher and an original thinker. Though Gandhi has not propounded any philosophical systems in the academic sense, yet in the depth of his writings and speeches, beliefs and actions, we find a consistent worldview of philosophy of life. And one such definition is the philosophy based on truth and non-violence. Now, coming to the paper of Dr. Safi Moshe Blanc, who had written on a glimpse on the Gandhian and Khasi perspective of truth, now talks about reformation of the mind of the individual, that is, the need of the hour, lamenting on Gandhi's principles of truth, that truth is God and God is truth, that truth is a sovereign principle, and above all, called as the eternal principle. She also talks, that we need to live a righteous, a truthful life to experience truth, and at the end, and truth as the end, and non-violence as the mean, which is also translated in Khasi, Kahok, but in Palay. Now, coming to Dr. Senshi Dhamai's paper, very interesting on, the Gandhi's concept of education of women with special reference to the Garo woman. We see here that she gives a Gandhian view on women education, which is based on biological discrimination of men and women and on family ideals. Now, as nature has made men and women different, it is necessary to maintain a difference between the education of the two, as being lamented in the paper. They are equals, but their functions, they differ from one another. Now, she says that Gandhi assumed that men are fit to perform outward activities and women the household ones. Now, in this paper, a historical lens has been adopted to understand the use, to examine the different issues of women developed as part of Gandhi's concept on education of the Garo women. Now, coming to the last paper, which was just presented just now by Mr. Kerry Hockman Lingdok. Now, it deals with how we go about analyzing the works of Gandhi based on village economy. Now, he gave us an attempt to understand that agriculture is the very backbone of the country and how one should adopt Gandhi's concept of rural economy. We also have to look at the past, history to solve contemporary issues, because we do not have, the solutions to the contemporary problems with the contemporary world developments. Now, he also concluded by saying, and I may add to it, that what Gandhi said, that if you want to see true India is not found in the metropolitan cities of Bombay, Calcutta, Delhi, but true India is to be found in the 700,000 villages. If these 700,000 villages perish, it is said that India will perish too. Now, thank you so much for this panel. Dr. Lalita Agarwal, Dr. Safi Moshabla, Dr. Senshi Diamai, and Mr. Kerry Hong, for those wonderful papers. Now, before we end, I would like to take this opportunity as convener of the webinar on celebrating the Mahatma. I would just like to thank a few people before we conclude. Now, I take immense pleasure in offering the vote of thanks and bringing this webinar to a suitable conclusion. Firstly, I would like to thank Shri F.A. Kharkongor, Commissioner and Secretary, Department of Art and Culture, Government of Meghalaya, and his entire team and department for collaborating with Synod College in this year-long celebration commemorating the 150 years birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. Now, I take this opportunity also to thank all the chairperson, Ms. Yamon's Aim, Professor Amina Pasa, Dr. Charles Ruben Lingdo, and Dr. Dhiraj Porgotoki for taking out time from your busy schedule. Now, I take contribution and paper which were excellently unique and insightful. I also take this opportunity to thank the Principal of Synod College, Sir R.M. Lingdo, the Vice Principal, Dr. M. Rani, Dr. S. Jirwa, and the Coordinator of the IQAC, Dr. G. Lingdo, along with all the members of the organizing committee for extending their help and support in making this webinar a success. Last but not the least, I extend my gratitude to all the participants who have joined us in this webinar. A big thank you to you all once again. Thank you. We have come to the end of